Hello, my name is Jerron Vale from the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. Our equity project began a little over a year ago with a vision for addressing inequities and educational disparities for Missouri citizens. The department's desire is to build a careful process for addressing inequities and show our commitment toward equitable outcomes for all Missourians aligned with our vision to empower every Missourian with the skills and education needed for success. The Building Bridges series is an informative look at how Missouri's colleges, universities, and community organizations are addressing equity. We hope you learn from these shared experiences, and thank you again for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. We're excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about community college enrollment and demand and solutions for boosting enrollment and student success at Missouri's community colleges. My name is Melissa Levitt. I'm the Director of Research for the Strada Institute, part of Strada Education Network, and I'm the lead author for the recent report we just published on community college enrollment and demand. Strada Education Network is a nonprofit focused on building more equitable pathways between education and work. I'm joined today by Dr. Seth Reichlin, and I'll hand it over to him to introduce himself.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks to the staff at the Missouri Equity Project for inviting me today. I'm especially pleased to talk to you about demand for education and training in my native state. I have worked in higher education research and marketing for almost 40 years, mostly at Pearson Education. I now serve as a senior consultant and advisor to College App, a new service that helps connect adult learners to college and workforce programs around the country.
Thanks, Seth. So we've got a presentation plan that should take about 45 minutes, and then we look forward to hearing from you, answering your questions, and hearing your insights. So as you're listening to us, please also be thinking about solutions and different approaches that you'd like to share, different challenges to solving this enrollment decline that you'd like to make sure that you share with us in the Q&A. So our presentation is going to focus on community colleges and the role that they play as a critical bridge to success for education and workforce development. We're going to be talking specifically about a student cohort that is waiting in the wings. And these are the adults in Missouri who tell us they are interested in community college. I say they're waiting in the wings because even though they're interested in community college, they haven't enrolled yet. Community college enrollment has actually declined across the country and in Missouri too. We're going to talk about why that might be, and we'll also talk about ways to support these adults, not just by enrolling them, but by supporting their success all the way through graduation and beyond. And we'll talk about why it is so important to invest in the right solutions to do this now. As we begin to emerge from the pandemic, we're figuring out what this recovery will look like, and we need to ensure that this recovery is equitable. We know that community colleges are a vital source of accessible training and education. They fuel economic mobility by preparing grads for jobs and growing industries. But when enrollment goes down, people lose out on these opportunities, and industries lose out on a pipeline of skilled workers. So by putting the right solutions in place now, community colleges can be prepared to support students and businesses in driving our economy forward. So we have a lot to cover, and here is our plan for how we're going to do that. First, I'm going to put some facts and figures around enrollment declines. We'll look at the enrollment picture nationwide, and then we'll focus on Missouri. And we'll pay special attention to the populations and to the communities who have been hardest hit by enrollment declines. Next, we're going to think a little bit about what is causing these enrollment declines. We'll discuss the persistent challenges that have historically stood in the way for adult learners, for low-income students, and students of color. And then we'll talk about what's at stake. We'll look at the students and the industries served by Missouri's community colleges and discuss what is lost when student numbers go down. After that, we're going to talk more about who these students are who are waiting in the wings. Who are the adults who want to enroll in community college? Seth is going to dig deeper into the data that we have about community college demand in Missouri and show you data mapped down to a very detailed level. And finally, we're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about ways to engage these potential learners and meet the demand with solutions and interventions that will support their success. So first, we're going to start with some bad news. We won't spend too long on it, but just to kind of level set here, we're going to talk about what has happened with community college enrollment this year. It's been a very, very difficult year on students and on colleges. Enrollment is down across the board. Nationwide, community college enrollment declined in the fall by 10.1%. We just got the spring numbers and we know that it didn't improve. It actually got a little bit worse. And Missouri is experiencing that same trend. Community college enrollment in Missouri was down 8.5% in the fall. So let's talk about what that means in terms of who was lost. Missouri community colleges have lost 6,000 students in the past year, so from fall 2019 to fall 2020. And when you go back to 2018, Missouri community colleges have lost 11,000 students. Nationally, we know that when enrollment numbers decline, they hit certain communities the hardest. Overall, we know that first-time students were the least likely to enroll. And within that first-time student cohort, it's older students and students of color who show the sharpest declines. So that last slide gave us a picture of the students who weren't served by post-secondary ed this year. But we have to look at those declines in the context of who historically already has not been served as well by post-secondary ed. This year's enrollment decline could actually be widening a gap that already exists in post-secondary attainment. We know that overall higher ed is not producing Black and Latino grads at the same rate as white and Asian students. Even among graduates, the benefits of having a degree are not distributed equally. Whites still earn more than Blacks and Latinos with the same level of educational attainment. So as we look at these trends in enrollment declines, we're doing so with urgency for a couple different reasons. We should look at them with a sense of urgency because the declines this year were dramatic and they're worth paying attention to. But we should also look at them with a sense of urgency because the communities that have been hit hardest by these declines have been excluded from educational opportunity for far too long. So as we begin to think about what's causing these declines and how we can bring students back, we should do so with an eye toward addressing the long-term inequities that have been standing in the way of success for too many students. So what are some of these challenges that are standing in the way? This is actually a major focus of the research that we do at the Strada Institute. We've conducted more than 100 hours of interviews with adults who are trying to make progress in their lives and careers. We heard a lot about their motivations, their goals and experiences, and also the barriers they've encountered in trying to achieve their goals. And I want you to hear it directly from the learners. So I'm going to show 3 short videos of adults discussing their challenges in pursuing education and career opportunities. We'll watch them one at a time. I'll give a little bit of narration and background, and they're each under a minute, so we'll go through them pretty quickly. So as you watch this first video, think about what it would feel like to try and find your way in an education system with very, very little information or guidance.
I feel stuck. After working somewhere for 20 years and actively looking for jobs now, I didn't have a clue what to do.
What I don't want to do is being like, I saw my mom do this growing up, where it was contract work. And so there'd be like a job for a particular amount of time, and then you know, the job's ending and then having to go find more work immediately, you know. And that's why I've stayed at jobs for so long, is because I really don't like having to go find a job.
I had made a supervisor, what they call a supervisor 1 with the county. And I was like, you know, I love this job. I love what I do, but this is not my end all be all. And if I'm going to give myself the best opportunity to be able to succeed in life, I should probably pursue going back to school.
It's not the same for a student that just graduated high school and they're young. For me, that I've been so many years without school.
Sort of have an idea of the things I like to do, the things that are interesting to me, understanding where my strengths lie, but I don't have a map.
What we hear from these learners is that there isn't much access to the information and guidance that you need to start a higher ed journey. We know from surveys conducted by Strada that nationwide, slightly more than half of adults who say they intend to enroll in community college would actually be the first generation in their families to complete college. So they can't follow the example of parents who went through this process. They need to figure it out on their own. But we also know that it's tough to find information. Less than a third of adults nationwide actually feel like they have a very good understanding of critical aspects of the education journey. Things like what skills they should learn, what program they should attend, even how long a program would take. So lack of information and a lack of guidance is one major challenge. Let's talk about another set of challenges now and watch one more video. It's related to a lack of guidance, but this gets more directly at the challenges that come from a lack of support.
I need to be called out. I need to be spoken to. I need to be able to reach out to somebody. I have to have constant communication because academically cannot do it on my own.
I didn't really have any support at home because I didn't grow up with either of my parents, and I was in and out of foster care. And so growing up, I had it rough. I didn't really have anybody I could get advice from. I'm one of those people, I had to figure it out.
I
could have gone to college, but it would have been difficult. I grew up in a housing project. My mother did not have money. We would have had to have taken loans.
My biggest challenge has been overcoming those thoughts in my head that are like, you can't do it, or listening too hard to what other people say when they say that I can't do something that I know that I can.
A lack of support is standing in these adults' way. Support comes in a lot of different forms. It can be a lack of support for essential needs. When essential needs aren't met, school falls to the bottom of the priority list. Or it can be the support needed to get rid of self-doubt and to build up confidence. Like we just heard, getting rid of those voices inside your head that sometimes are in there saying that you don't know how to do something, you're not able to do something. Almost half of adults considering higher ed experience these doubts. They fear they won't be successful students or that they've been out of school for too long. So to overcome these fears and doubts and challenges, adults need support that right now many feel is lacking. And we're going to talk about one more set of challenges here. These challenges have to do with everything that's already going on in an adult's life without even adding school to the mix. Life is a complex and dynamic balancing act. It's made of family responsibilities, work, health, community, and more. These learners are going to be talking about how hard it is to fit education into all of that.
I really needed to work full-time while continuing and pursuing an education. And the traditional college setting really isn't conducive to that.
I would put my children on the school bus for school and ride my bike and clean houses for the doctors and the dentists down in, in the high-end neighborhoods, and then ride my bike up to school, and I'd, audio tape my classes and ride home and meet the kids. And after they were bathed and they're sitting there, watching TV or relaxing before bed, I'd put my headsets, listen to my lecture again, and I'd be sewing wedding dresses at this long table that I had, and I would just be sewing dresses and listening to the lecture. On the weekends, I was driving a taxi.
I had put it on the shelf, and maybe was going to revisit it later, and they have tuition reimbursement, and it's like, okay, so now it starts looking different, and now you start listening, okay, well, maybe I can go back to school.
Many of the adults considering community college are doing this balancing act now. Among the adults across the country who say they intend to enroll in community college, 2/3 are employed and more than half have children living in the household. So for many adults, adding learning to their busy lives requires a commitment of money and time, and most people don't have money and time to spare. Especially after what we've all been through in the past year. With multiple crises, there's even less money and time to go around. And the results of these crises have not been evenly distributed. We know that they took the biggest toll on those with lower incomes, lower education levels, and communities of color. So COVID-19 took all those challenges that we just heard about, made them worse, and added in a few new ones. People who were out of work didn't have the money to pay for a degree. Those with kids were probably too busy homeschooling to put time into their own education. And with education moving online, that may make it more convenient for some, but it was even tougher for those with limited broadband capabilities. So that's the context we're working with. Enrollment is down and it's hitting adults in communities of color the hardest. We know that adults were already facing barriers relating to financial pressures, lack of confidence, essential needs, and the challenges of having to figure all this out on their own. And we know that a lot of these challenges were made worse during the pandemic. So take a deep breath. That's the tough news. That's the hard part. From here on out, we're going to be looking ahead. We're going to be looking at how to address these barriers and bring these students back. And the first step toward finding the solution is understanding what is at stake in solving this. Why is it so urgent that we bring students back and make sure that they can access the education and opportunity that community colleges provide? It's an economic imperative and an equity imperative, and the two are closely connected. Community colleges play a critical role in providing equitable access to education and training. Nationwide, community colleges educate 1/3 of all post-secondary students, including more than half of Black and Latino students. The average age of students is 28, so they serve our working adult learner population as well. And we see these same trends in Missouri. In Missouri, more than 1/3 of higher ed students who attend public colleges attend community colleges. and we're going to take a closer look at the communities served by these schools. This slide and a couple that are following this might look familiar. They show tables from your 2019 Equity Report, and I love these because they provide really clear snapshots of the Missouri students who are looking to community colleges to fuel their education and careers. So we see in the chart on the left here that two-year institutions serve the greatest percentage of students living in poverty. On the right, we see that Missouri's community colleges serve the greatest percentage of older students. And we'll look quickly at just a couple more of these charts. Here we see that community colleges serve the greatest percentage of Black students, slightly higher, or really just about even, than the percentage of Black students served by four-year institutions, including HBCUs. And here we can see how community colleges are serving a couple other groups too. We can look at a chart that highlights enrollment for low-income students and first-gen students, and the highest percentage of both of those groups attend these open enrollment schools. So when we zero in on these populations, it's clear that community colleges are a lifeline for students who have not been historically served as well by higher ed. First-gen students, Black students, low-income students, and working adults all rely on community colleges for education and training. And I use the word training on purpose there, because community colleges offer career-relevant education, and in many ways are the institutions that are closest to industry with the best ability to connect with employer needs. So when we think about what's at stake in terms of bringing back students and building back enrollment, it really goes both ways. For students, what's at stake is accessible and career-relevant education that can connect them to good jobs. For Missouri's businesses, what's at stake is a pipeline of skilled workers ready for work in growing industries. Enrollment declines mean that fewer people are preparing for jobs in industries that need them. A recent article in the Hechinger Report shows that enrollment declines are hitting programs that train grads for high-growth industries like construction, cybersecurity, healthcare, manufacturing. And we know that these industries were already facing a shortage of skilled labor. These industries are important for the Missouri economy too. The Missouri Department of Economic Development actually includes 3 of these on their list of target industries for growth. These are health sciences, IT, and advanced manufacturing. But you don't even really have to look at specific industries like this to see what is at stake for communities and the regional economy in building back enrollment. 93% of Missouri community college students stay in Missouri after graduating. So that's almost all. And they're contributing back to society in meaningful ways. What you're looking at now is an overview of the benefits that community colleges return back to the community in terms of what students earn and the additional revenue and savings that go to taxpayers and society. These numbers are based on a series of economic impact analyses conducted by EMSI of 45 community colleges across the country. Community colleges offer profound benefits to students and to communities. When enrollment drops, of course, these benefits aren't available. Fewer individuals have access to education and career training that leads to economic mobility. The students who rely on community colleges the most are the ones who also stand to lose the most. And that puts industries and the local economies at risk. So there was quite a bit at stake in solving this issue of declining enrollment, but there's a lot working in our favor. Adults don't want to miss out on these opportunities. They are still interested in pursuing education and training. And despite the challenges we went over, despite those declines, millions of adults across the country still say they want to enroll in community college. 20.5 million adults nationwide say that they want to enroll in community college. And we know that from data from Strata's Education Consumer Survey. Demand is also strong for community colleges in Missouri as well. Data from Seth and his team at College App show that more than 500,000 adults in Missouri say they want to enroll in community college in the next 2 years. I'm going to hand it over to Seth now to discuss the Missouri data in more detail.
Thanks, Melissa. So before talking about demand, let me first take a minute to explain the 2 meanings of demand. The first is employer demand. Regional education and workforce analyses usually start by looking at trends in the job market. Using data from employer surveys and job postings, labor market information companies like EMSI predict how many job openings will be available in a region and what education and training credentials those jobs require. Colleges use those forecasts as input in designing educational and training programs. In a perfect market, colleges will build the right programs with enough capacity to meet regional employer demand. Even with the best program design, there's no guarantee that when colleges build programs, that students will come. So in addition to employer demand, we also talk about learner demand. Learner demand measures how many potential students want to enroll in a college, university, or vocational training program. To measure learner demand in Missouri, College App used a technique called person-level modeling. Person-level modeling was first developed for presidential campaigns and has now been applied in many industries. College App's person-level models are done state by state. In Missouri, College App started with a large statewide survey of adults in June 2020 with over 3,100 respondents. The survey respondents were drawn from a comprehensive Missouri consumer database, not from a pre-selected panel. For each respondent, the database includes dozens of demographic, educational, financial, household, and lifestyle variables compiled from publicly available sources. The College App survey asked each respondent, quote, "Do you intend to enroll in an education or training program in the next 2 years?" Question mark. Redo, please. The College App survey asked each respondent, "Do you intend to enroll in an education or training program in the next 2 years?" We then asked respondents whether they prefer university, community college, or vocational technical school as a provider of that education and training. Once the survey was finished, College App applied machine learning techniques to find the patterns in the data that best predicted who answered yes to the question, "Do you intend to enroll in the next 2 years?" and who preferred each type of institution. Once we finished testing the reliability of the individual predictive models, we applied them to the entire database of 4.9 million Missouri adults. College App assigned a series of scores to each adult: their intent to enroll, their preference for university, their preference for community college, preference for vocational technical school, and preference for all online instruction. I'm now going to show you what College App scoring looks like in St. Louis and Kansas City. First, let's look at the Penrose neighborhood in St. Louis, where the median household income is about $25,000, and a large number of residents have high intent to enroll scores. This map shows a 10-block area in Penrose. If you've worked on a political campaign in the past few years, you may recognize this as a turf map. Each pushpin represents a person who has high intent to enroll and who prefers either community college or vocational technical school. The darker the pushpin, the higher the intent to enroll score. If you need to reach out to these people, we have their addresses and phone numbers, as well as emails for many of them. Zooming out, here's a map of adults in St. Louis City and County who have high intent to enroll scores and who prefer community college or vocational technical school. Each dot represents one person. The more saturated the dot, the higher the intent to enroll score. We can see that learner demand is concentrated in the city and in northern St. Louis County. In Ladue and Clayton, by contrast, very few adults have modeled high intent to enroll in community college. Let's look at a similar map for Kansas City. There are adults throughout the metro area who have high intent to enroll scores and who prefer community college. But the highest concentration is in Northeast KC, in neighborhoods such as Pendleton Heights and India Mount. As in St. Louis, we have addresses for each adult and phone numbers for most. Switching back to St. Louis for a minute, we've added up total learner demand by zip code. The highest numbers and percentages are in northern St. Louis County. Over 10,000 people in zip 63136 have high intent to enroll and prefer community college or vocational technical school. What we see in both St. Louis and Kansas City is that adults in low-income communities have the greatest demand for education and training, especially at community colleges. The statewide map shown here summarizes adult learner demand for education and training in each of Missouri's 115 counties. The shading indicates the percentage of adults aged 25 and up in each county who have high intent to enroll and who prefer either community college or vocational technical school. In Jackson County, for example, we identified over 90,000 adults with high demand, representing 20% of the population aged 25 and up. Although demand is concentrated in urban counties, rural counties have high demand when you add them up. In the 101 rural counties in the state, we identified a total of 117,000 adults who have high intent to enroll scores and who prefer community college or vocational technical school. Melissa will now tell you more about the demographics of adults who have high demand for community college in Missouri.
All right, thank you, Seth. So zooming back out to the state level, let's dig a little bit deeper into just who these potential students are. More than a third are people of color. More than a quarter have an annual income less than $25,000, and more than half are parenting. So that gets to all those struggles that we heard about when we watched those videos, hearing about balancing childcare, work, and all of life's responsibilities, needing guidance and needing support to do that and to overcome those challenges. The reason that it's important to pay attention to who your potential students are is that understanding the learner experience will point you toward the right solutions and interventions to support their success. So now is the part of the presentation where we're going to start talking about solutions. I'm going to discuss these solutions in the context of the learner journey. So we'll start with enrollment because that's the issue in front of us today, but also because that is that start of that learner journey through higher ed. We'll be following that journey all the way through graduation and then on to career preparation. I like to think of it as enrollment to employment. Learners need solutions to make the entire education journey seamless, to connect those dots between education and career. Together, those solutions form a learner-centered ecosystem, and that framework is what you're looking at right now. The learner-centered ecosystem was developed by Strada Institute to make sense of all of those services, supports, and resources that are needed to increase higher ed access and success and to improve connections between education and work. It can feel like so many different kinds of supports and resources and services are needed. So what this framework does is really tries to make sense of it all and gives a picture of how it all works together. The framework was developed based on what we know about the challenges that adult learners face. And what we have found is that many of these same solutions serve other communities that have been historically excluded from education and career opportunity. Students of color and low-income students, for example, as well as adult learners. The solutions I'll discuss have equity at their core. We have evidence that they remove barriers to enrollment, completion, and provide for strong career outcomes. And this evidence comes from the community colleges and higher ed systems that are already out there working on this, that have successfully implemented these solutions. So they show the examples of the best of what's out there and provide examples for how this all works in real life. I'll mention upfront that some of the solutions I'll discuss come from organizations within the Strada Education Network. I've already mentioned MZ and some data from MZ in this presentation. I'll also be talking about InsideTrack and CALE, and I'll discuss other solutions too from outside the network. It's all with an eye toward pulling together the best of what's out there now as a springboard for future innovation. So the first solution that we're going to talk about addresses navigation. Navigation is what learners need to understand their options, wade through all of the education possibilities out there, and choose the program that is right for them and will get them closer to their career goals. And making those kinds of decisions is not easy. As you can see on the left, there are about 1 million credential and degree programs out there. So how can learners navigate through these choices and find the right program for them? One solution is coaching. And the evidence that we provide here on the right comes from a coaching program at Wake Tech Community College. The program goal was to re-enroll students who had stopped out of school, and the coaching intervention was provided by InsideTrack, and it succeeded in doing just that. Coach students were 1.5 times more likely to re-enroll, and as you can see, the returns on investment in this intervention were very, very strong for the college as well. The next set of solutions that I'll discuss encompass all of those wraparound supports that learners spoke to when we talked to them to hear about the challenges and what was standing in the way of education and career success. We heard from those learners in the videos about how lack of support stands in the way, but wraparound supports can address that. And they can provide everything from mentorship and coaching, similar to the enrollment coaching I just discussed, all the way to helping with housing and food insecurity and other financial challenges. We know that Missouri's community colleges serve the highest percentage of low-income students. These students may likely be facing food and housing insecurity. We know that nationwide, 44% of community college students experience food insecurity and 60% experience housing insecurity. When students experience financial pressures like that, of course, it can be very, very difficult to stay on track with education. But one thing that's been proven to work are emergency grants. At one community college in California, students who received emergency grants were actually twice as likely to graduate. And we know that colleges in Missouri are providing emergency assistance too. I saw in a report from this department that Missouri colleges are creating emergency funds for students. They're using food pantries to help students out. And all of these forms of support can make the difference between a student who has to stop out and one who can persist and graduate. The next solution takes a little bit of a different look at how to improve retention and graduation, and it actually has to do with what students are learning and how that learning takes place. It's offering what we call a more targeted education experience. The adults that we spoke to often found themselves taking courses they'd already completed or getting lost in comprehensive degree programs and losing sight of their goals for completion. We talked to one woman named Zuli. She wasn't in one of the videos that I was able to show, but we've talked to her and heard her story too. And she really said that graduation felt like something that would be far into the future because she felt stuck taking courses of materials that she already knew, and it didn't really have much to do with her career goals. And we know that it can be far into the future. The average time that it takes for adults to complete a 2-year degree is 7 years. So how can we make that experience more targeted? One option is giving students credit for prior learning. A study done by Kale found that students who received credit for the learning they had already completed elsewhere through prior learning assessment, it actually boosted graduation rates by 20 percentage points. And graduation came a lot sooner, 9 to 14 months sooner. So it's shaving off some time of that 7-year average. The next two solutions I'll talk about cover what happens after graduation. So let's look at ways now to connect community college education with better career outcomes. One way is through work-based learning. We know that 70% of students work while in school, and sometimes that can be an asset. Often it is. It gives students professional experience and set them up for the job market. But low-income students who work do not experience as many of these benefits. Often they're not able to go for the job that matches up completely with their course and career interests because they need to work to support themselves. So for the many students who need to work, think about that 28% of Missouri adults at a lower income level who say they want to enroll in community college. They'll have a better chance at success when their work is tied to learning. Apprenticeship programs are a great example of this. An advanced manufacturing apprenticeship in Kentucky called the FAME program increased graduation rates. And not only that, we know from a survey of those participants that the apprenticeship program actually brought students into school who probably wouldn't have enrolled otherwise. It's just not something that they saw for themselves. They didn't really see themselves attending college. It's not something that they really envisioned when they were growing up. But in this case, we know that work-based learning not only improved graduation rates, it also improved access, which takes us full circle and really becomes another solution for tackling enrollment declines. And now we're going to talk about career preparation, because that transition from education to employment is a critical part of the learner journey. At the beginning of the presentation, I talked about how community colleges support their local economies. One way, of course, is by graduating students trained to work in growing industries. In turn, these graduates get access to greater economic opportunity and mobility. So one solution for making sure that this education to career transition happens is making it really, really easy for students to explain the skills that they've learned in their degree program, and making it easy for businesses to recognize those skills. We call this transparent hiring because hiring decisions based on skills aren't shrouded in mystery. There's clarity around the skills that a job requires and the skills that a job applicant has. So one solution to support community college grads on the job market is to align coursework to the skills that local industries are asking for. And we have some data and some examples from MZ of how this can work. It doesn't have to take long, but it is a powerful step for improving career outcomes. And finally, this last set of solutions that I'm going to talk about really bring it all together. They're what's really fundamental and foundational to supporting the student journey. We call it an ecosystem enabler. And one thing that's an ecosystem enabler is reliable internet access. The importance of digital access and the challenges of the digital divide became so clear during the pandemic. Colleges quickly pivoted to moving online, but the challenge wasn't just in turning in-person courses to online courses, even though that was tough and a challenge and a huge accomplishment. It was also about making sure that students had the broadband access and the devices they needed to complete these courses. From Strata survey work, we know that more than a quarter of students nationwide struggle with internet and computer access. And in Missouri, almost 40% of people living in rural areas do not have broadband access. As you can see in that column on the right, we know that many institutions across the country responded to this quick pivot to online learning by loaning students laptops. We know that almost half loan students mobile hotspots, and Missouri has made a strong commitment to addressing this challenge too. The governor's committed $50 million to expanding broadband access. And at the local level, Missouri's institutions got very creative very quickly in offering immediate solutions. They loaned out equipment, they set up mobile labs, they provided Wi-Fi in parking lots and green spaces. These services are all part of that fundamental infrastructure necessary to ensure that all learners can benefit from all the opportunities that colleges offer. So as we move toward wrapping this up, let's talk just a little bit about how all of these solutions come together. They're critical solutions for addressing not just the short-term challenges presented by the pandemic, but the systemic challenges that have been with us for far too long. These solutions have emerged at community colleges in response to learner needs, and they show the way forward to not just recover enrollment, but to address the inequities that were with us long before the pandemic. Community colleges in Missouri and across the nation experienced steep declines this year. These declines were steepest among first-time learners, especially students of color and older students. And if we lose these students now, they will lose out on the education and career opportunity that a community college can provide. The challenge is urgent, but there's reason for hope. We saw that more than 500,000 adults in Missouri want to enroll in community college, and they want to enroll soon, in the next 2 years. And we saw that solutions already exist that support enrollment, support the entire student journey through graduation and on to career placement. There is a community college student population ready and waiting to be engaged. Investing in the solutions and interventions that work is going to open up a lifetime of opportunity for these adults. Creating more inclusive pathways through education in the workforce now is going to fuel an equitable recovery and help colleges emerge from the pandemic even stronger than they were before. We invite you to check out our report. The link is on the slide, and explore the data for yourselves. And as we start the Q&A, we'd love to hear your perspectives on what you see as the challenges to recovering enrollment and the solutions that are making a difference for your students and in your communities. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you all for staying with us. We'll open up the Q&A section at the moment. Right here, we at the moment, we don't have any questions from the chat, but I do have a couple questions I'd like to ask. We do have our two presenters here, Dr. Melissa Levitt. If I'm saying that right, I apologize if I'm not, and Dr. Seth Reichlin. And I just open up the questions with the couple questions I have. Have you has your organization shared this information or the report with community college organizations? What is their response if you have, and what are your next steps after this?
Thank you for that.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks for that question. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us today and for sticking with us through the presentation. So we have been able to share this report. We've been focusing on some of the states that we were able to do the data for, and College App has data for many states on that. And what we've heard is that a lot of it is ringing true. And there's, I think, an interest and a desire to be looking forward now. So what's ringing true is that people are seeing that, yes, the populations that we're looking at where declines have hit the hardest, that these are the groups that community colleges are focused on bringing back, and talking about the supports and the experiences and the challenges that learners are experiencing. All that is really seeming to ring true. And what we hear is that, okay, let's get more information on that and let's figure out how to move forward. And I think that in terms of next steps, it's really looking in some ways at, you know, if we are going to have more resources to work with, if there's funding coming in, if there's an appetite for looking at some of these challenges and focusing on enrollment, but going beyond that too, what are some of the solutions that are going to be working best and have the biggest impact? So we're really, I think, as researchers, we're really interested and kind of ready to join community college leaders and thinking, okay, what's going to make what we're talking about here really actionable, and what's going to make it applicable to community colleges, but other kinds of institutions and other student groups too. I think this topic of enrollment declines is something that Strata is very focused on researching and being able to understand more, and seeing, you know, what information we can provide and what resources we can provide to help community colleges and kind of all work together on this.
Oh, I'll just take less than a minute on that, but College App helps more than 30 community colleges around the country so far, ranging from very small, Paris, Texas, to very large, Kingsborough in Brooklyn. We help them strategize, and we help them find adult students.
Awesome, great, thank you. Thank you. And someone did ask, is your data available for public viewing on your website? And it looks like Ms. Janice Solom, you put the link in the chat, so appreciate that. Thank you very much. Another question here. One of the challenges I see in rural communities is a lack of transportation, either to a physical campus or to an area with reliable internet. Have you seen creative solutions to this problem elsewhere?
So the first solution that comes to mind is not from a rural area at all, but we know that transportation challenges can happen in urban areas too. So this isn't something, it's a very different setting, but we know that the CUNY ASAP program has been looking at transportation. They provide passes for people to use public transportation. But I think in a rural area, of course, it's a very, very different situation. And I think that with broadband, with the investments in broadband, I think that will make online education more accessible, but it's still a huge barrier. And we talk about, online education maybe made some things more convenient or worked well for some students, but of course it makes it even tougher for folks who don't have the internet, the devices, or even just sort of the time and space in the home. So that's something that I think we're very, very interested in looking at. What is sort of the different need there between an urban and a rural area, and very interested in hearing from all of you too. What are solutions that you're seeing, or what are particular challenges that maybe need to be focused on a little bit more in terms of innovating the right way to approach that?
Awesome. Great, thank you. Another question here, and will this data include access to individual email, phone, and addresses that you mentioned, or is there another process to access this data? I think they're talking about individualized data. I think you mentioned the presentation.
I think that is another process. So we have posted summary data down to the county, sometimes the zip code level. And generally, if you are looking to reach individuals, that has to be done through a campaign. And we'd be happy to chat with anybody on the call about how to organize those campaigns. So yes, that's a separate process.
Awesome, great, thank you. There still seems to be another question here. There still seems to be a disconnect between systems and services needed to support adult learners. Given the intel provided by College App, those communities have people who often have the highest need to stabilize their prior to enrollment. How do you build capacity to bridge the divide?
That's a great question. And I think there's a few parts to it. I mean, one is really being able to tune in into what the learners are saying that they need. We find that finding the right solutions really starts with listening, and sort of listen to the learners is kind of a mantra that we come back to a lot. So I think that one of the first things that has to happen is being able to really understand what learners are experiencing, and to be able to find effective ways to share those stories across all stakeholders, because we do know that there are so many different stakeholders and pieces and components that need to come together to bridge this gap and to bridge this divide. So I think your first principle is really understanding what is needed and how that might vary, between a rural and an urban area, or just between different communities, and being able to have good ways, effective ways to share that, and to let kind of the solutions and innovations, I think, grow from that. I mean, we also, at Strata, we talk about this ecosystem approach, because we do know all of the things that have to come together. So sometimes the work comes from, seeing that maybe there are point solutions that are working in these sort of smaller areas or more targeted areas, but how do we bridge partnerships? How do we create partnerships to kind of bridge that and create new collaborations? And I think in many ways, that's sort of the focus, and where the most opportunity for growth is, sort of connecting the dots. If the dots are there in terms of what students need, how do we connect them and build bridges in a way that's going to create that whole network of support?
Awesome, thank you. Wonderful. Next question here, just another question I had. With the interviews that you conducted with the students, did they, do you have information on what kind of programs they were seeking? Was it more certificate level programs? Was it, was it going for the 2-year degrees? What kind of information did you gather from that?
Yeah, and we actually have a range of information. So we have information on the learner perspective at Strata from a few different sources. So one is the interviews that I've talked about, and we were able to share some videos from that. And we've done, our Strata Institute team has done over 100 hours of interviews with adult learners. And many of the learners that we spoke with had, I mean, there's actually a huge range. I think some had not kind of connected yet to the education path that worked from them. Some had, and we talked to students from organizations and institutions that are specifically focused on completion for adult learners and looking at that, what that means from a 2-year or a 4-year perspective. But we also have a much broader, I think, range of information and perspectives from our consumer insights team, and they do large scale surveys focused on the learner experience, the learner challenges. They've had their public viewpoint series that was launched just after the pandemic and is still going on to be able to understand sort of what's going on right now and how are those experiences and challenges changing. But we do have a range of information. And I think in terms of what adults are seeking, we're able to kind of lift up some kind of big trends or topics. You know, is the preferences for hybrid education, or is the preference, we know that the preferences for targeted programs and career focused programs, and that being able to make that career connection is a big priority. So we have some large scale data that we can probably share in the chat that points to that. And then when we talked to the interviews with the adults, hearing their stories, you know, they were all, we were able to really, I think, get into the nuances of the experiences and hear a real range of what people are looking for. But the focus on career and knowing that the education is going to be worth it, I think, are just ring true across all the perspectives that we hear.
Awesome, absolutely. What suggestions do you have for building that level of support with limited funding?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. And I think that it's really about understanding I think that one thing we were able to do in the report is provide some evidence and sort of a head start on figuring out what's going to work and what's going to be effective. I mean, we're always looking for evidence-based practices. So if we can see sort of what has worked and kind of understand what's the context in which that worked, was it a specific student population? Was it a specific delivery method of providing or delivering that service? I think that that's really important, but being able to start with the evidence and again, come back to what the learner wants, I think is going to sort of point toward a direction of figuring out what's the best way to approach this on limited funds when there's a lot at stake and not a lot of room to fail and try something different. Seth, it looked like.
Well, so just a couple of things. On the public funding side, one of the things that we did in the report is break everything down by legislature. And I think the subtext there is that every one in the legislature has a significant number of adults in their district who want and need further education. I think being able to point that out to them, actually down to the block level, makes the case for directing some public funding to both wraparound support and outreach. And then on the private side, I mean, there are foundations that have gotten interested in this, particularly after the pandemic. So it's probably an interesting time to be talking to your regular funders.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Seth, too, thinking about what did we learn from the pandemic and what opportunities might be coming out of it. And I think in some sense, it's a real, I think, narrowed and sharpened focus on understanding what the challenges are and kind of the stakes at solving these. So, you know, it could be sort of, we talk a lot in this report, or sort of the idea that we came into it with was how do we meet the moment for demand? And I think that there are a lot of things coming together in this moment, which could open up new opportunities.
If I can chime in, I'd mention one other thing. My name is Mo McKenna. I'm with InsideTrack, one of the nonprofit members of the Strata Education Network. And we're working on a lot of attainment work across the country. And I'll just mention one example is we've just finished a pilot in the state of Washington with College App targeting in demand or adults who are showing high demand for additional education and training, and then providing support around helping those individuals navigate. And I think when we think about scalability, it is a challenge because we had a huge diversity of need come through that funnel. So, you know, Sarah, you asked this great question, how do you do this at scale? What we found is first, we needed to understand what the needs were of that community. And now we can begin to deploy various strategies. And some of the things we're talking about in Washington State, for example, are there are going to be folks that are more ready, and let's get them into an institution pipeline right away. There's going to be some that are just focusing on how do you even start the process of career discovery. For that group, we'd like to present more, webinars or group coaching opportunities for them to get more information about how to assess skills, assess interests, see what in-demand careers and pathways are there. And then for some individuals, it's more about connecting with members of their own community, and how can we get community-based organizations? How can we get folks in a SNAP office or in a Goodwill Industries or in an employment office to have the skills to assess that somebody might have some college no degree or might have some interest in post-secondary, and build communities that are engaged around getting that individual into a pathway. And in that regard, it's more about all kind of in a regional community building that network of support and understanding about how meaningful education is to adults in that community, and building that network.
Great, thank you, Ms. McKenna. Appreciate that. Good insight. Awesome. Just to let everyone know, if we get to 1 o'clock and we don't get through all the questions, we'll copy those and send those to the presenters, and then we'll ask them to respond if they have any follow-up with that. So just want to let everybody know that. Another question here. I'm a former undocumented student and now student advisor. My question is, with all the data that shows decreasing enrollment, why are community colleges still not wanting to voice their concerns to legislators about the issues undocumented students face with anti-immigrant policies? So any response to that? Have you seen any response from community colleges regarding those populations?
I mean, that's a great question. It's not a specific conversation that I've had with the folks that we've been sharing this with, but I think it gets back to sort of that idea of wraparound supports and being really able to understand sort of everything that's going on in the student's life. But I think that that's a great question, and I don't know if any of my co-presenters here have specific thoughts to share on that.
I was just really enthused to see that the new federal dollars coming down do allow for supports. That was a huge step forward. So I'd love to talk more about that if you want to reach out afterwards of how we could connect with that community and the folks. Anytime we can get close to the people who are working directly with students and helping to coach and support them, it's so helpful to be able to then amplify that for other folks who aren't as close to students and their experiences. So I say, perhaps this is like your torch to bring forward, your flag to plant, because you're the people who, you and your colleagues who are working with these students know them the best. And what we found at Strata is when we do these sorts of videos or we do panels and we bring the students, there is nothing more persuasive than meeting a person and hearing their story. So if we can help with stories, we would love to.
Absolutely, make those connections. Wonderful, thank you. Do you know why these populations, imagine the ethnic populations, want the community college experience rather than other preparation options? What have you learned from your experience regarding this?
I don't know. It's hard to generalize. I think some of that is lower expectations, and some of it is just that's the best place if you're an adult. I mean, you don't. They're really geared for adult learners with an explicit mandate. So I think that's it's probably the two main things. We can look at the survey data and see the more of the whys. Mostly we've been talking about the who and the where, not the why.
Yeah, I wonder, Mo, as you work with students and you try to help them overcome their own doubt and their own lowered expectations, and then like that's the college knowledge they have, how do InsideTrack coaches work with folks to like steer them and say, you know what, you could do more, you could start this and you could get yourself bridged? How do you guys think about that?
Well, I think it is about focusing on that individual need and then seeing what opportunities are available to them. And going back to the question about like, why are folks looking to community and technical college? It's still because employers are recognizing that degree as the main signal that that individual is prepared for employment. Now, we know that there's, I think, questions from employers about the quality of that preparation. And at the same time, most hiring folks, if you're hiring for a role, putting on an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree is going to be the indicator that the person meets those requirements. And so the reality is that people that are looking to upskill or reskill or find more stability in a career path or earn a living wage for their family, they are going to look to post-secondary options for finding that pathway. In terms of how a coach would help navigate, a lot of that depends on a state or a system or community figuring out what those pathways are, right? That's oftentimes where it starts, is saying, what are the in-demand careers, going back to that labor market information that Seth highlighted previously, and then really helping with assessment around what skills and interests align to those in-demand pathways, and then helping them create a plan. Realistically, the reason why most individuals leave a pathway is there at the outset. They have challenges with childcare, they have challenges with finances, and so we start trying to work on that early so that it doesn't get in their way in the long term.
Awesome, thank you very much. Real quick, just one last question we have, and then we'll wrap up right before the hour ends. Here at the Office of Post-Secondary Policy, we are exploring stackable credentials as a possible solution to help get adult learners stabilized on a career path. Do you have any insights on what types of credential programs work best, and have you actually gone down the path of this work?
It's absolutely something that we're looking at, trying to understand more about in terms of how this fits in the targeted education pathway. I know we don't have much time, so I'll just sort of reiterate that something that Mo just said, which is so important, is aligning that to the career pathway. And what we've seen, there's Ed Design Lab is doing some work in community colleges, and it starts with what does the industry need and how does that track back to what that stackable program could be. So I think it's really something like that, as you say, to sort of help students make progress and help them kind of get on that career path. Being able to start with that understanding what the industry need and how the employer is there to partner on that pathway is really, really important, I think, for making sure that stackable pathways do what we want them to do.
Awesome. Great. This is awesome. Thank you. So go ahead. Were you going to say something, Dr. Reichlin? I'm sorry.
No, that's
okay.
I think we're at the end of the hour too.
Cool. All right, great. Ms. Shalom, thank you so much, Janet. Thank you for putting in the link there for a webinar that's going on next week for Strata. So if you want some information about that, it's there in the chat. Any other questions that we'll have, we'll forward it to our panelists and they will get back to us. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Reichlin. Thank you, Dr. Melissa Levitt, Ms. Janet Shalom, and also Ms. McKenna. Thank you so much for your insight as well. Everyone have a good day, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Opportunity.
No problem.